The intensification of mixed grain policy in response to food shortage.
This segment explores how the South Korean government responded to severe food shortages in the 1960s and 70s through implementing mandatory mixed grain and flour-based diet policies, which, despite public resistance, gradually changed Korean dietary habits and established new food cultures, though rice remained the culturally preferred staple. To address the political instability caused by rice shortages, the government launched the encouragement of mixed grain and flour diet movement, 혼분식 장려운동, in November 1962. Here, 혼식 means eating mixed grain, while 분식 means eating wheat flour. Rice vendors were prohibited from selling white rice separately and were required to mix it with 20% of other grains. Restaurants were also obligated to serve rice mixed with the same proportion of other grains. School and government office cafeterias were banned from using white rice, and mixed grain consumption was encouraged in households as well. The flour diet promotion movement intensified in 1963. When compounded with poor summer crop harvest, all sales of rice-based food was prohibited during lunch hours starting in July. On February 1963, the government announced a temporary ban of the use of rice in brewing. After several extensions, this measure eventually led to a complete ban on brewing with white rice from August 1966. In addition, starting in July 1963, it was announced that every Thursday would be no alcohol day. Rice brewing remained prohibited until late 1977, when rice self-sufficiency was declared, with wheat-based makgeolli filling the void. This regulation became an unexpected opportunity for some. Soju distillers that used potato or sweet potatoes, such as jinro, stood out in the market starting in the 1960s, while brewers with longer histories struggled with the regulations. From August 1964, restaurants were required to reduce rice content by half in soup-based dishes like 육개장 and 설렁탕, replacing it with 25% other grains and 25% noodles. The now popular practice of adding thin noodles to 설렁탕 originated during this period. Beginning in 1969, Wednesdays and Saturdays were designated as No Rice Day or 무미일, prohibiting the sale of rice-based foods from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. Mixed grain meals were effectively mandated in private restaurants. Additionally, the government regulated rice bowl sizes to reduce rice consumption. This forced mixed grain policy led to the distribution of stainless steel rice bowls smaller than traditional ones, giving rise to the term 공깃밥, bowl of rice, for the rice served in these containers. The state also mandated that Bunshik Center be established in every municipal district where people could find diverse dishes made of wheat.
Persistent rice shortages and consumption control measures in the 1970s.
Despite the government's various efforts, rice shortages persisted throughout the 1970s. The introduction of 통일 rice significantly increased rice production, but rice consumption also increased, even at a higher pace, until the early 1980s. For example, in 1974, rice production increased by 5.5% compared to 1973, but annual per capita rice consumption increased by 6.5%. In response, the government intensified its efforts to forcibly reduce rice consumption. The mixed grain and flour diet policy was strengthened, and from December 1974, the use of rice in making snacks was prohibited. Additionally, rice mills were required to maintain a 70% polish ratio for retail rice, and rice cakes had to contain at least 30% other grains. Schools even implemented measures where students were not allowed to eat lunch boxes that with less than 30% mixed grains. In 1972, global grain production decreased by 33 million tons. In response, from late 1972, Korea expanded no rice days from twice weekly to 5 times per week. From March 14, 1973, all restaurants were required to include 30% barley in rice dishes. The government employed various means to control the private sector, while public institution cafeterias had no choice but to comply with government directives. Controlling the menus of private restaurants proved more challenging. However, the government leveraged its authority over sanitation inspections conducted by the Ministry of Home Affairs, making restaurants' continued operation contingent upon compliance with mixed grain policies. Even students' lunch boxes became subject to control. Although government intervention in household meal choices lacked clear legal basis, schools nationwide conducted daily lunchbox inspections. Parents who packed white rice lunches received school letters urging them to cooperate with the national policy. These school lunchbox inspections persisted into the mid-1980s. These various measures to mandate mixed grain diet continued into the early 1980s. Through this process, the collective memory that rice is scarce was deeply reinforced in multiple forms over a long period, further intensifying the Koreans' attachment to rice.
The era of Bunshik with reluctance and reservation.
Meanwhile, since the mid-1960s, a new category of wheat products began to entice South Koreans with its convenience, affordability, and most importantly, familiar taste. Instant ramen, a post-war Japanese invention, was introduced to South Korea in 1963. Samyang Foods began producing chicken ramen under the license from Myojo Foods in Japan, but soon changed the recipe from the original clear and salty chicken soup to a thick and spicy beef soup to appeal to Korean consumers. This change proved successful, allowing Samyang to secure an important share of the South Korean food market. It took longer for bread to claim its place at the South Korean dining table. As with the Japanese, Koreans first experienced hybrid bread, such as those filled with red bean paste or sweet buttercream. The state's consistent support for Bunshik, however, gradually created new space for South Korean bakers. First as snacks, and later as substitutes for regular meals, bread was provisioned to soldiers, public officers, and school children, the last of whom developed a particular taste for it. As a result, by the mid-1970s, Koreanized bread could establish itself as a relevant, albeit not preferred, meal choice. The South Korean public initially showed significant resistance to the government's mixed grain and wheat-based diet initiatives. Many viewed these policies as unwelcome impositions that challenged deeply ingrained cultural preferences for white rice. The forced consumption of wheat and mixed grains in public institutions and restaurants often led to complaints about meal quality and satisfaction. Rural communities were generally more resistant to these changes, viewing the mixed grain policy as another burden imposed by urban-centric government policies. Many farmers continued to prefer pure white rice when possible, seeing it as a symbol of prosperity and proper meals. This urban-rural divide in acceptance of dietary changes reflected broader social tensions in modernizing South Korea. Despite official promotion of wheat consumption through nutritional science and policy measures, most Koreans continue to view wheat-based meal as inferior substitutes for proper rice-based meals. This perception persisted even as wheat products became increasingly integrated into daily diets, demonstrating the complex relationship between government food policy and deeply held cultural preferences.
Mobilization of nutritional science for the political goals.
To justify these strict regulations, the state again mobilized nutritional science, which asserted that Bunshik and Bunshik were better for health. Slow but steady growth of wheat consumption was supported by nutritional science, similar to the patterns in the 1920s and 1930s. After 1945, home economists in Korea, who had been educated and trained under the Japanese gateigaku tradition, had to adapt to the new American model of home economics. In this sense, 가정학 in South Korea became a mixture of Japanese and American home economics. Home economists published reports on the dietetic superiority of Bunshik and Bunshik. These findings were widely disseminated through mass media and incorporated into school textbooks, justifying the government's policies. The government also leveraged pre-existing cultural beliefs about Western physical superiority, attributing Westerners greater height and strength to their wheat consumption. This narrative helped justify the government's promotion of wheat consumption as a part of Korea's modernization efforts. However, public reception was largely resistant, particularly in rural areas. Most Koreans viewed wheat-based meals as inferior substitutes for traditional rice-based dishes. Over time, economic necessity led to grudging acceptance, especially among urban workers who found wheat products like instant ramen convenient and affordable. A generational shift also occurred as younger generations, regularly exposed to wheat-based snacks, developed more favorable attitudes toward these alternatives. Despite this partial acceptance, the government's scientific justification for wheat consumption never fully overcame deeply held cultural preference for rice-based meals, demonstrating the limits of using nutritional science for political objectives.